Excellent. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's virtual information session to learn more about the draft Area Redevelopment Plan for Downtown Canmore. My name is Caroline Hayden, Communications Officer for the Town of Canmore, and I will be moderating our conversation today. Also with me, we have Josh Cairns, Senior Policy Planner with the town, who is leading this project. And today, Josh will be walking you through a brief presentation, which will take around 20 to 30 minutes, and we'll cover the key elements of the draft plan. And then we will open up to your questions. Manager of Engineering, Andy Asarte, will also be with us to help respond to your questions as well. And we should get you out of here by 1 p.m. So throughout the presentation, as you have questions, you can type them into the Q&A, and we will answer as many of them as we can once we get into the discussion period. So because our time is short today, I will get us started right away and welcome Josh to kick us off with this presentation.
Thanks, Caroline, and hi, everyone. Great to have you here today and excited to kind of walk you through, give you a little bit of an overview of the draft plan. And then, as Caroline mentioned, have plenty of time to kind of go through some questions and answers at the end. Okay, you should see a presentation on your screen. Caroline, do you mind just confirming that's up?
It is up.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this is a quick overview of our journey today. I'll start off with a little bit of a recap of how we got here to the draft plan that we're going to walk you through. We'll cover the highlights of the draft plan, going through each of the core topics of the plan. So land use and urban design, transportation, parks and open spaces, arts, culture, heritage, and then closing off with environment, climate change, and resiliency. I'll kind of conclude with a little bit of a recap of just how this plan will work, how you'd expect change to slowly happen over time, how you might see it, and then we'll have time for the remainder of this session to go through some questions and answers. So first off, how we got here to a draft plan for Downtown Canmore. So when I say draft plan, I'm talking about what is called an Area Redevelopment Plan. And if we want to give a definition to that, it is a long range, it's a statutory plan, and it provides a high level of vision and a set of policies that will help guide the continued evolution of an area. And in this case, it is downtown, or Canmore's town center, as some of you know it. And so why do an area redevelopment plan for downtown? Well, it's important that we know where we're heading and having tools in place to guide that change. Change is, after all, inevitable. So the question is, how do we direct it in the ways that we actually can control as a municipality? So on the one hand, where we are today is, well, we don't have an area redevelopment plan downtown. So that means it's not entirely clear where the destination is, what it looks like, and how we're going to get there. And there's going to naturally then be some bumps or some detours along the way. Change will still happen. Houses will still get torn down and rebuilt, but it's going to be less directed. It's going to be less intentional, and it's going to be a lot less efficient with how we spend our money and our limited resources. On the other hand, when we have a plan in place, like an area redevelopment plan, we have a pretty clear understanding of what that future destination is that we're looking to get to. In this case, it's the year 2050 as just a general benchmark. And then some of the ways that we're actually going to get to that end point. So this helps ensure that the actions we take as a municipality is more intentional, it's more guided, it's coordinated, and it's a lot more efficient as well. So the area redevelopment plan for downtown Canmore covers what we call this plan area. It's generally guided by the Bow River as the natural boundary on the west, the Spurline multi-use pathway, or the Spurline Trail, on the northern extent, bounded by Railway Avenue on the eastern edge, and then sort of 5th Street and jogs up to 5th Avenue on the southern extent. And so the policies in the area plan apply to whatever happens within these boundaries. But in preparing the plan, we of course looked at the areas outside of that as well. We looked at the amenities people try to get to. We looked at the broader transportation network, so that this can all fit together and work as a coherent whole. So through this planning process that we call Connect Downtown, we did 4 phases of work. 3 of those were public facing. So of course we scoped out this project and what it would look like after council approved budget for it. And then we kicked it off publicly in October of 2023 with the vision phase. That vision phase was about broad engagement with interest holders, with the community, residents, and really just hearing about how is downtown working for you today? How should downtown work for you tomorrow? What are things you love about it? What could be better? So that helped us get a vision statement, some guiding principles and values to help inform the next phase of work, which was the options phase. And we kicked that off in spring and summer of last year. Based on the vision, we brought some possible strategies out to the public, as well as a draft land use concept and a draft transportation concept. Collected feedback on that, made some tweaks and revisions, and then ultimately drafted the plan. So what we see today and what I cover in the highlights is going to be quite similar to what we already engaged the public on in the options phase. But now behind the scenes, you have a full written draft plan that you can review if you want more detail and a deeper understanding of the nuance behind some of the policies and how that's going to look. So our engagement approach through this was, as I mentioned, through 3 public-facing phases of work. We did a lot of broad engagement in the visioning phase to kick it off. Usually when these processes take place, you then just do engagement in the draft plan, but we wanted to have an extra touch point with community in the middle to make sure we were on the right track for what this could actually look like in the future. So we did extensive engagement in the options phase again, just to make sure as we drafted this plan, it generally kind of aligned with community sentiment, community values, and was not going to be sort of out of the blue with any major surprises. So we listened through a lot of different methods. We really wanted to hear from a broad range of people. So we did everything from engaging youth in classroom activities to online engagement, and then really even unconventional tactics that brought out record numbers of participation from the community. So we partnered with the Folk Fest and had what we called the warm up and cool down events, which was a concert series in downtown businesses paired with open houses where people could come and engage on the project. I have some of the others listed there. I won't go through all of them, but then just an important note is we're doing that warm-up event again next Thursday, where the Folk Fest is doing pop-up concert series downtown, and we'll be at the Civic Center along with other programming and engaging the public and the community on this draft plan. So if you're not aware of that, you can go to it on the project webpage at mycanmore.ca/connectdowntown and find details on that event. So in total, this is the largest engagement initiative we've ever taken at the town for any planning activity. We had over 4,000 pieces of input from the community and interest holders, and that's not counting the input that's happening today and is happening over the following week as we engage on the draft plan. That also included over 2,000 responses to our first 2 surveys and input from 14 organizations that really represent everything from affordable housing to the environment to accessibility or social services. And here's just some photos of that warm-up event, and this is something that we're going to be replicating, as I mentioned, next week. So lots of engagement activities happening at the Civic Center, paired with a lot of activation, activity, concerts, and excitement in downtown businesses. All right, so what I will do now is walk us through the highlights of the draft plan. These are the key pieces of change that you'll probably want to know about or be aware of. And as I had mentioned, I will start that off with land use and urban design. So buildings and development and the look of them and how that's going to happen downtown. So a few highlights. What we heard through community engagement and what we know as a big asset downtown is this idea that it is a certain character. It has a strong connection to nature, a strong connection to the mountains. And so really we set out to limit change in what we permit in terms of building heights. So most of the downtown area is still being capped at a 3-story height maximum with only consideration for 4 stories in certain areas. So very different change from what we already permit in existing zoning today. And that's really to maintain that connection to the mountains that you experience downtown today when you walk around. So since we're capping the building height so low, we're instead focusing on just introducing more subtle and diverse housing choices so that there can be more attainable home ownership or rental options downtown. So that's looking at things like multiplexes that you already see in South Canmore, and they fit in really well with the urban fabric. These types of forums really complement that idea or the value that we're trying to get to, which is that let's prioritize public views. So if you're walking around Main Street, if you're walking around 10th Street, if you're hanging out in a park, you still have that connection to the mountains and a sense of openness in that space. One thing we also heard, of course, was wanting to really tighten up the visitor accommodation piece and how much of that we allow and what that looks like. So we're introducing new controls on that through the permitting process. And also a big piece is trying to figure out and trying to act on integrating downtown with the Bow River. So right now, they feel a little disjointed. If you were on Riverside Park or walking down a pathway there, you would have no idea that, the heart of Main Street is just 2 blocks away from you. So we've made some changes to the land use to try to better integrate those two pieces. So you can kind of get a feel for that here when you look at the land use concept. When I say land use concept, that really just means the types of buildings and their maximum heights that we would allow downtown. So as you can see, the permitted building heights is very similar to what it is today. And most of that area is in this sort of pale yellow color. And that means we're capping building heights at 3 stories. So if you're walking down Main Street, if you're walking down 10th Street in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it's going to be the same feel as it is today. There's not going to be buildings taller than 3 stories. And then in strategic spots, consideration for 4 stories. So on Railway Avenue, this is a form you already see. So continuing with that. And then in what we're calling the Civic Corridor, right in the middle of downtown there, where you see that little orange strip, that's all land owned by the town. It doesn't impede views, it's just off of lanes. And we're looking to, of course, use those sites for community benefits. So things like affordable housing, arts and culture facilities, recreation facilities, things that really service the residents. And that's some of the rationale there behind that slightly taller building limit there, so 4 stories. The key piece, as I mentioned, was we want to better connect downtown to the Bow River. So one way we're looking to accomplish that is allowing some really small scale resident or community oriented commercial uses west of 8th Avenue. So you can see that little extra block there that allows some commercial opportunities. Those would be really small scale, things like cafes and so forth, but it would really give that sense of continuity and connection to Riverside Park and the Bow River. And as I mentioned, building heights are not changing too much. We've really tried to limit how much change we allow downtown as it's quite constrained. So this gives you just an idea of what is actually changing from what we already allow today. So everything that's blacked out here, we're not contemplating any change. So where you saw 3 stories, where you saw 4 stories, that's already allowed today. And you can kind of see that when you walk down towards South Canmore, where you have a lot of 3-story multiplexes going in. Outside of those areas, we've also tried to really limit the amount of change. So in those residential areas, like to the west or the northwest, we're only looking at allowing potentially up to an extra 0.5 meter or 50 centimeters of building height. So if you're on the street, that doesn't look any different, but what it does allow is a little bit more flexibility and ability to accommodate duplexes, triplexes, and multiplexes, and some of those more family-oriented, but more attainable types of housing. Another big piece of this land use concept is trying to focus on affordability. So a big component of policy for town land is using it for developing non-market affordable housing. So putting controls in place and using town land to make sure that whatever we build is affordable housing, and it's affordable housing for the long term. When it comes to private development on land that the town doesn't own, we don't have any authority to be able to require it. So we have to rely on incentives. And so we've proposed incentives in the draft plan to make sure that we're also getting more affordable housing scattered throughout the community. And so one of the ways we're doing that is the town has a tool called density bonusing. It basically just means you allow slightly taller buildings in exchange for certain amenities like affordable housing. That tool already exists today in the town, and it applies broadly to these areas, and it already applies to the entire downtown. So we're looking at doing 2 things. One of them is just updating them so that we get more affordable housing out of it, or more contributions to affordable housing, and making it more flexible or adaptable so that we could see more people participating in it. But the second piece is actually scaling back the actual area it applies to, so we can maintain public views and sunlight on those key spaces, as I mentioned. So this is what that looks like conceptually. So everywhere in gray would be excluded. So right now today, the density bonusing scheme in the town applies everywhere, but we're paring it back and only applying it to the areas in pink. So that if you're walking on Main Street, if you're walking on 10th Street, for example, there's no risk or chance that those are ever going to exceed that 3-story height limit that I had mentioned. So it's one thing to look at a map. It's another to actually get a feel for what that could look like when you're on the ground or walking on the street. So this gives you an idea of what we would see throughout the residential areas, and it's a form you already see downtown. It's those multiplexes, the duplexes, the triplexes, the more attainable types of family-oriented housing. Very, as you can see, very similar to the current urban fabric. It still helps maintain views of the mountains. It helps maintain solar exposure, and it's a look and feel that's very quaint and charming and just fits in with the character that we love about downtown. Then as we move a little bit closer to the commercial area, as I mentioned, extending that commercial area 1 block west towards Riverside Park, we're looking at what we call the transition area. It's the same kind of heights, the same building form that I just mentioned, no changes there. The only difference is just allowing little pocket, small scale commercial uses to serve the community, like cafes and similar types of forms. Then we get to the commercial core, so that's Main and 10th Street. Again, give you an idea of what that could look like. And as you can see, even with existing buildings sort of whited out on the left and the right side of it, same building heights, same form, just really building off that identity that exists today and providing some additional direction around it so we can really embrace that unique look and feel that makes this area special. And then the gateway area refers to generally the properties along Railway Avenue. That's where I mentioned we were looking at allowing the 4 stories, but I shouldn't say allowing because the 4 stories is actually already permitted, but it would be extending them a little bit further north than where they are today. So a little bit north past 10th, also allowing consideration for 4 stories instead of 3. So probably no surprises here. Again, it's a similar form that you've seen, but noting it's really doubling down on that identity of Downtown Canmore and what makes it work and what makes it feel like a place you want to be while still maintaining that important identity and connection to the mountains. So what it could look like, building off some of the things you've already seen emerge, like the Wild Heart property, for example, embracing that idea of mountain architecture, but allowing and encouraging some more contemporary forms of it. So really building off more material selection that speaks to nature and the mountains. So incorporating darker or lighter stone elements that speak to some of the natural geology in the area. So where we have a lot of slate or charcoal or dolomite or limestone in the mountains, trying to find ways to build that into new developments. Pine, spruce, or lighter toned woods, those are the local woods that we see in most of the forests here. So again, weaving those elements into new developments. And then complemented by things like powder coated steel that's darker or weathered steel, which is sort of like a naturally rusted steel, to speak a little bit more to that mining or industrial past that makes Canmore unique from other mountain towns. And then in the public realm side, like benches and seating and lighting, it's sort of building off that similar theme. So weaving in structured boulders, wood tones in our seating wherever possible to really build off that connection to nature. Layered lighting, so a little bit of gentle lighting at the ground level, possibly above if you're in a commercial area to create a sense of place. But wherever we put that, always making sure that we're trying to follow things like dark sky principles, minimizing noise pollution, making sure the lighting is gentle and pedestrian oriented. But the most important thing to take away is it is building towards a more unified character and theme and identity over the long term, rather than a bit of a piecemeal approach. Similarly, we would tie that into improvements into our signage and wayfinding to make downtown really easy to navigate, and making it a multi-layered approach so that you might have key wayfinding signs at certain locations that show you an entire trail network, but then also little reminders when you're on that network about where you are or what route or pathway you're on, and making sure they are one unified theme that looks similar so it's really easy and intuitive to navigate. So that's land use. Then we'll naturally move into the complementing area, which is transportation and mobility. And that's probably one that most of you have a lot of questions about. So we'll try to do a little bit of a deep dive on this one as well. So an important thing to acknowledge is no matter what happens downtown, Canmore and the area outside of downtown is growing. There's development happening outside of the area, and there's more people trying to come and visit Canmore as well. So what that means is more people are trying to drive, more people are trying to get downtown. And so in an area that's already redeveloped, where we have a few points of access, like the bridges on 8th and 10th Street, for example, and it's a fixed network. We can't just infinitely expand it anymore, as we have development that's already established, property lines and what can exist today. So what that means is to make it work, to make downtown work for people that have cars and need to drive, is making sure that anyone who can or wants to walk, cycle, or take transit has that as a convenient option, so that they aren't forced to have to get in their vehicle and add more congestion downtown. So naturally, making this plan work for vehicles means we have to make it work for people walking, cycling, and taking transit, so they're not adding to that congestion. So the town has mode share targets. That's basically a target for how many people we want to see walking, cycling, and taking transit to make the network work for cars. And we have a goal of 40% of those trips by 2030 being by those modes, walking, cycling, or transit. We are reinforcing that need for downtown and likely have to exceed that target in the future to make the road work for cars. And so we put in the plan two maps, but I'm going to focus on this one. One is just a map of the major street network. The other is focusing on the active transportation network. So how we are going to improve the walkability or the transit accessibility of downtown. So there's a few key things here to note. One is we're really building off the success of the summer pedestrianization of Main Street and the positive feedback we've heard on this idea to date, and proposing a year-round pedestrianized Main Street. I'll get more into that into a second. We'll talk about what that looks like in terms of timing and the rationale behind it. But one of the benefits of pedestrianizing Main Street is it reduces the number of signalized intersections we need, the number of four-way intersections, so we can make improvements to the surrounding transportation network and street network to improve vehicle flow downtown. So there's sort of these co-benefits there. There's benefits for people walking and cycling, but then there's benefits on vehicle flow as well. Building off that, trying to make it more walkable and accessible, we're proposing mid-block connections, which are these in the dotted red lines there on the screen. And that's helping break up the large blocks downtown so that if you're on 10th Street, you can quickly cut down to Main Street or to 9th Street or to the Civic Center if you need to. This is going to be complemented by a transit hub that we are proposing with the T sign there right in the heart of downtown. So when that town property is redeveloped in the future, we would integrate an expanded and improved transit hub there to accommodate improved transit service throughout the downtown area. And then when it comes to walking, we have improvements proposed to the entire multi-use pathway and trail network. Most notably to that is a new multi-use pathway you can see off 9th Street there, connecting to the Bow River. So there's an unused road right-of-way right there that goes through the forest. So we'd look to use that to improve the connection to the Bow River for residents that are trying to walk or get over there. And then on the eastern side, off Railway Avenue, you can see going towards the southeastern corner, there's a dotted gray line there. And that is a new multi-use pathway that we'd look to build along the rear properties there to, again, improve connectivity, allow you to walk through a more pleasant experience rather than having to do it on Railway Avenue. So when it comes to Main Street and what a pedestrianized Main Street could look like in the future, it might be something like this. The benefit of a year-round pedestrianization is we can make permanent public spaces that can act as a draw for people to come downtown as their point of doing shopping, going to restaurants, meeting friends, meeting family, or conducting business, making it a place you want to be in all months rather than in just the summer months. Now, this is only being done because there is a major opportunity in the future where all the underground facilities like water and sewer needs to be replaced in the next decade or so. It's reaching its, theoretical end of life. So all of Main Street has to get redone, redesigned, and reconstructed anyway. So until that happens, we're proposing Main Street continuing as it is today. Open to vehicles in the winter, closed in the summer. And that's because we know we can't just close a street that is designed as a street for vehicles right now in the winter and make it a successful winter place. But it allows us to reimagine that and think about, well, how can we make this an attractive place in the winter that will still bring people down there so it's not quiet and underutilized. And it gives Main Street and 10th Street a bit of a competitive edge against other commercial areas that are starting to emerge that are pulling residents away from some of their needs. And then similarly, this is something that you kind of recognize probably next to the Civic Center on 9th Street. It's where we have this Walk of Champions treatment we talk about, and we're proposing extending that along the full extent of the lane. So vehicles would be allowed. There might still be parking in the lanes, but you have a delineated walking space along the shoulder with pavers or a no more attractive material, complemented by these commercial developments that have patios or commercial entry points on the laneway. So again, it's really about making this a more special place for people that works for the greatest number of people as well, and works for the businesses that are trying to do well there and be vibrant year round. And this is what I mentioned with the mid-block connections. They can be really subtle, like you see today on the right. They could be more prominent, like you see on the left, but that's, of course, a much more urban example than we'd see downtown. Really, though, what we're proposing is trying to find these little 2, 3, 4 meter wide connection points through the business areas to help make them more walkable, and it could be connected with patios or other uses as well. And then finally, of course, there's the question of, okay, if we're doing that with the streets, if we're doing those changes downtown, well, how do we make it work for people who have to drive and park somewhere? And so making it work for downtown residents and those that need to drive means doing a couple things. One of the major pieces of the plan is affirming the direction that we will provide intercept parking facility next to downtown. And there's a few different sites we have proposed, with the preference being next to the elevation place. But you can imagine the benefit that would have to the area. By having an intercept parking facility, we can help intercept people coming off the freeway and trying to enter downtown, thereby reducing congestion and demand on those streets or parking spaces, but also allowing them to have a convenient one-stop shop for their parking needs. They don't have to drive around aimlessly looking for parking. That will also help free up the downtown parking spaces on the street for residents and for others, but we'd have to complement that with gradually expanding our on-street regulations over time to keep up with that parking demand and make sure there's spaces available for those that need them. So that could include changing rates, but really a key element too is keeping and expanding our resident permitting areas and some of the controls on that, so that visitors aren't able to park on certain residential streets, even if they're just 100 or 200 meters away. So keeping those parking spaces for residents. So parks and open spaces, a lot of exciting changes here, but really keeping that fabric that we talked about. So the light green with the dots in it is really where we're looking at keeping all the natural areas that are downtown. The darker green is our park spaces, so our neighborhood parks or our regional parks. And then pink is our enhanced open spaces. So those are things like our plazas that we're looking to keep or construct. And then purple, there's just the one, it's Eckloff Park, which we're proposing as keeping as municipal reserve, which is really reserve land for the municipality to use to meet community needs. So right now that would mean just continuing its current function as a passive green space. So when we improve our parks and open spaces, the key direction here is building off that identity I mentioned in the land use section, which is using natural and functional elements. So you're looking to incorporate more logs, natural timbers, rock boulders into our spaces as defining elements, as seating, as play structures, rather than relying on more manufactured or constructed things. Similarly, we'd look to integrate infrastructure for programming so we can have more events like electrical hookups in these spaces, and year-round use. So designing for winter, incorporating windbreaks, weather protection, so they're more viable or functional in December, January, February. And you might have seen it on the map, but the really big proposal here is having a large central plaza in the heart of downtown that can really act as a space of gathering and celebration for the community and for residents. So this would include the part that's outside the Civic Center today, but extending that all the way across the street to the western site towards Arts Place, and having that be a functional space that could accommodate much larger programming and community events, whether that's farmers markets or little concerts or you name it. This would be the space to have it, and it would be right next to this attractive future pedestrianized Main Street. And one final key change here to just point out is over time, as more people are trying to get into downtown or more people live downtown, or even just as Canmore grows and people are trying to engage with its amenities, we're going to need to do an expansion to Riverside Park. So we are proposing expanding that to the north, which does provide some fire smart benefits as well. And then it integrates, as you can see, with that sort of area that we call the transition area, where we'll allow some really small scale commercial. So you could picture in the future being at Riverside Park, there's a cafe across the street and a nice pleasant walk into the heart of downtown. And one other piece to point out is you might have seen, you can see it on the left image there, but there's a little bit of that vacant space over towards Spring Creek and Railway Avenue, where we have some utility infrastructure and a pathway. And we're proposing future park space there that would really be designed to have amenities or features for a really broad range of users. So more passive green space, a dog run, picnic areas, but also incorporating a multi-age playground as well. So this could be a really new park space to meet the needs of a lot of different residents in the area. And then we have arts, culture, and heritage. A few key highlights here is building off this idea that our art should be multi-purpose or interactive. It shouldn't just be something that you don't notice because it is just something to look at, but something that you can actually engage with it. It could either incorporate elements that build off the mountains or natural materials. It could incorporate elements of the surrounding geographic area. It could incorporate seating features, but ideally it's something that you can actually engage with. Similarly, we want to design our infrastructure and public spaces to have a secondary function as art. So even if we're putting in lighting, for example, or certain seating arrangements, trying to design those in a way that actually build a sense of place and have a function that is in addition to its purely, seating function, so to speak. And also expand, of course, the acknowledgement of Indigenous culture downtown. So we are proposing incorporating more Indigenous art and embarking on a place naming exercise for our parks and open spaces. Probably of interest to a lot of people as well is we are proposing protecting heritage resources. So preserving them, for example, or integrating them. So no change is proposed to designated heritage or historic sites. But what we do want to see is more placemaking activities for sites that are under construction on Main and 10th Street. So rather than allowing them to just put up boarding or metal fencing, requiring construction on those two streets to actually put up some art or something that has a storytelling or interpretive feature. So you can get an idea for that in the bottom right image there of what that would look like. And then we, of course, also want to support the expansion of critical arts and culture facilities. So either the creation of new ones or the expansion of things that you know already, like Arts Place. And finally, we'll just close off with touching base on environment, climate change, and resilience so that we can make sure this area grows in a way that really responds to that natural setting and some of the pressures emerging from climate change. So we're going to do that by proposing expanded setbacks to water bodies. So buildings can't be built right up against our water bodies like the Bow River or Policeman Creek. Requiring all new development to incorporate fire smart best practices and wildfire resilient landscaping so that we can really reduce the risk of the community in the long term. And then wherever possible, really prioritizing the use of green infrastructure or what we call low impact development. So street trees, bioswales, rain gardens, basically these functional elements that provide a sense of greenery, but also do an important role of capturing stormwater runoff and also treating it before it goes back into the natural environment. And building off that, we also want to make sure we have more energy efficient and future-proofed buildings. So providing incentives for energy efficiency, committing any town development to a very high standard of energy efficiency, and also making sure parking spaces and new developments have the wiring for electric vehicles so that future homeowners or renters aren't faced with incredibly cost-prohibitive retrofits. Also building off that emergency preparedness. So trying to create new resilient community spaces on town land. So when we design a new town development across from the Civic Center as an example, making sure we incorporate some type of resilient community spaces in there so that if there is an emergency, if there's extreme weather, if there's wildfire smoke, people have a place to gather and take refuge. And finally, of course, we acknowledge downtown's next to natural areas. There are wildlife. How can we coexist? And the plan introduces new policy directions to make sure that that can actually happen in the future. So protecting natural areas wherever possible, limiting elk grazing habitat to reduce human wildlife conflicts, and other policies around new development to make sure they provide sensitive transitions to those natural areas. And so when we pull it all together, it could look something like this in the future. This would be 20, 30, 40, 50 years away, but it gives you a direction of this. It gives you an idea, of this incremental growth and change that might happen downtown. So a lot of it would look familiar to you with familiar building scales and forms, but then improvements to the street network, improvements to the flow of cars, improvements to the flow of people, of bikes, of pedestrians, and new public spaces for people to actually gather and have a coherent sense of place. And finally, before we go into questions, I'll just briefly touch base on how this plan will work and how change would happen over time. So change will be incremental, and it's all a question about how we guide that incremental change. And we do that through two ways: policies for development, and then also guidance for actions the town will take in the future. So the area plan provides policies that are going to shape future development in a way that aligns with the vision of the plan. So although development will happen gradually over time through the exact same mechanisms happens today, it will be subject to some of the policies I mentioned to make sure that the way those developments look, the way they contribute to the area, aligns with this vision we're trying to achieve. Development won't happen overnight, and the plan does not direct development to happen. Development is always the result of decisions or actions of actual property owners, the same way as it works today. So if you're a homeowner in the plan area, no change is going to happen to your property. It's up to you to decide what happens with that property. And building off that, I mean, same comment, the plan doesn't force the development to happen. It's just a tool to regulate the development. And then on the town side, we also want to make sure we're providing direction for the actions we need to take so that we are making sound decisions and investments that contribute to this future vision as well. So we also recommend in the plan an implementation framework that sets aside, here's steps we're going to take to achieve the vision, here's what those steps will look like, and here's estimated timelines for when that would happen. Those timelines, though, are estimates, and ultimately, at the end of the day, any investments or improvements or actions the town takes are going to happen over time and be opportunistic. So where can we leverage things like Main Street, for example, where the utilities is already having to get replaced? Well, let's now actually put a little bit of thought into this and think about what the future design can look like. And of course, improvements are going to be subject to funding constraints, and it's going to be financed through a variety of tools. So these projects will only take place when funds are available and become part of the town's budgeting process. And it's going to be funded through developer contributions, external grants, our regular capital budgeting processes, but it could also involve other tools like offsite levies, for example, local improvement taxes, or any other funding mechanism that might be needed to make sure that we are providing the infrastructure and amenities that are critical to make the area work. Okay, so next steps, we just have to conclude engagement next week. We will finalize the plan and prepare it for council consideration, which we are preparing this spring. That is when there'll be another round of more formal input, as this plan would have to be adopted by a bylaw. So there will be a public hearing where residents can speak directly to council and share their thoughts. Assuming the plan gets adopted by council, or when it does get adopted, implementation would begin. But as I mentioned, it's a 25-year plan. And even then, change is going to happen very gradually and slowly. And many of the properties still wouldn't redevelop in that 25-year time horizon. Really, the 25-year time horizon is just about the majority of actions the town can take, that the town is in control of, being able to happen. And thank you. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and Caroline will help manage the questions, and I'll give some answers.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Josh. First of all, and for those of you listening, if you do have a question that has come up for you during the course of Josh's presentation, or as you hear Josh responding to questions that come in, you can type them into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can here. So first of all, and this was a topic that came up quite a bit in our last round of engagement, and I know you spoke to this a little bit, but we have a couple of questions regarding Eckloff Park, and what the thought was behind keeping it as municipal reserve versus moving it into a park type protection.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that was definitely top of mind. It was something that we heard a lot of feedback on, obviously, in the summer. For those that weren't aware, the original draft direction was we were considering allowing residential uses on Eckloff Park that would be specifically for a town-led affordable housing development. After a lot of community feedback and concern about that idea, we made that revision in the draft plan, and we're just proposing maintaining its current designation as municipal reserve. So that's a designation that's on the title of the property, and we would keep that, and it would be subject to any town policies around the management of municipal reserves. For now, we aren't proposing through this plan, at least, any change. So that would just mean continuing its current use as you see today.
Awesome, thanks very much. We have a couple of questions regarding the proposed intercept parking facility. So I know that this would be a future project, but could you speak a bit to how an intercept facility would go about being planned and where the potential location might be and how that fits into our larger plans for the transportation network in Canmore?
Thanks, Caroline. Is Andy here? Andy, do you want to take that one?
So we've had, Andy, if you're able, we have some technical difficulties on the back end with Andy being able to join us as a speaker, but we can also follow up with additional information via text here. So Andy, if you are able to send us a note here, and we can loop back, but maybe on a high level, if you're able to speak to that, Josh.
Yep. Sure. Yeah. So Andy, whatever you want to share with us, we can bring that to the answers, and we can always circle back to this one in 10 minutes or so. But yeah, at a high level, so the intercept parking facility is proposed through this plan. When we did our transportation analyses, it was something that we identified a need for and something that would be critical for helping manage parking demand downtown, while also having the benefits of concentrating parking in a single convenient facility adjacent to downtown and the benefits that has on the actual street network. So if we provide a large, multi-level parkade facility adjacent to downtown, it means a lot of cars coming off the freeway or coming from the east side of the valley don't have to now enter the downtown street network and add to that congestion just looking for parking. It doesn't mean all parking would disappear downtown. It is in addition to and making sure there is one single convenient destination to handle the majority of it. And so we're looking at a lot of different sites, and in the ARP, we have identified preferred sites and committed to an approximate timeline that we expect this to happen. But the key thing, of course, is we have limited land downtown. So there's ongoing discussions around land acquisition or leases that would be needed to actually make it happen. And of course, the funding that would have to occur for construction to take place. So that's a high level. And I guess to sort of summarize succinctly, it means the plan has committed us to that direction. And we see it as one critical piece for solving the parking challenge. There is a timeline estimate in the plan, but ultimately it's subject to some ongoing conversations and funding discussions that we're having to give a more concrete timeline of when that will take place.
Awesome, thank you. So as you developed some of the transportation elements of the plan, including pedestrianized Main Street, can you tell us a little bit about how the planning team has taken emergency egress into consideration to ensure that people can get out safely? And you are muted.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question, and it's something that is both part of the plan and also part of continual ongoing planning processes that happen at the town on a regular basis to figure out how do we respond to an emergency should one occur and what is our plan. So in terms of the area plan for downtown, that was factored into our transportation analyses and projections in the future to making sure this network can function, people can get in and out efficiently, and in the case of an emergency, we can still make it work. So for Main Street, while that might be pedestrianized in the future, it would have still, of course, have to be designed for emergency vehicle access. So in the time of an emergency, there would still be a clear pathway for emergency vehicles to enter. There would be bollards that would be easily removable at the end so that the same function could occur in event of an emergency, no different than it is today. The pedestrianization of Main Street, though, gives the benefit in terms of vehicle routing. As I mentioned, it reduces some complexities around certain intersections. So we can now improve vehicle flow downtown to get in and out by reducing the number of choke points that currently exist. The main one I'm thinking of is at the east end of Main Street at 6th Avenue, we can now declassify that intersection and have it as a continue vehicle through road and improve vehicle flow drastically there.
That is awesome. Thanks, Josh. So we're just looking through some of the questions coming in here. There's some awesome questions. Thank you, everyone. Josh, I'm wondering if you could speak to how you were how you were able to implement some of the feedback that we received during the last period of engagement, where there was some concern around increasing the density / building heights downtown, and how we're finding that balance between maintaining views while also allowing for select density bonusing to advance community needs.
Sure. Thanks, Caroline. I'll maybe share my screen again because it'll probably be easier if I talk to things for people to also have something that's a point of reference to look at. So this is the land use concept here. I know I touched on it briefly, but this will give you a bit more time to look at it in some more depth. So the vast majority of the area, as I mentioned, is 3 stories. So that's the yellow. And then the orange is 4 stories. We heard some opposition to building heights beyond 3 stories in the summer engagement last year during the options phase. It wasn't universal, but there was concern about exceeding 3. Part of that, I believe, when we kind of read through the comments on that and some of the written responses we received, was a misunderstanding of what can already be permitted today. And that's partly why I added in this extra map here to just help communicate that a little bit more. So on Railway Avenue today, south of 10th Street, even though those lots are vacant today largely, there's some low density commercial uses on those sites, 4 stories can already be built there and is permitted under existing zoning. So we're looking at maintaining that. Similarly, in the residential areas, there is some concern over 4 stories, thinking we were permitting those outright. The residential areas, we are proposing a cap on building heights at 3 stories. That is only 0.5 meters above what is permitted today. The density bonusing I spoke to that I mentioned is already in effect at the town, and it applies everywhere downtown. And what that means is anyone coming in for development could get essentially an additional story of height beyond what the zoning allows, so long as they're providing affordable housing as part of that. We are scaling that back and reducing the number of places that it can actually apply to downtown. So we're taking something that's already in effect, we're not introducing something new, and we're actually constraining the geographic area it applies to further. So more areas can be kept at only the 3-story height limit and can't go through an additional story. So as I mentioned, the key focus here was more of that hidden density. So even though the residential areas might only go 0.5 meters higher on average in terms of an outright allowance, the focus would be on the use. So allowing more multiplexes as an example, rather than large single family homes. So I hope that clarifies that and helps address some of the confusion.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. We had a question come in regarding if we had, this is back to the intercept parking. If we located the intercept parking potentially at somewhere near Elevation Place, would we need to replan Railway Avenue to now accommodate a large flow of traffic to the intercept parking? So we were able to touch base with our manager of engineering on this point, and he reinforces that by moving that certain amount of parking outside of the downtown, we're not increasing extra pressure on railway. We're just taking that pressure out of the downtown area. So we would not need to adjust the traffic volume management on railway. It's the exact same amount of people traveling through that area, but we're just kind of pinching at the bud. So we are increasing that capacity downtown. And then another question for you, Josh, on the Eckloff Park item as well. The question is, why would we propose a new park? So for example, like the expansion to Riverside or the new park adjacent to Spring Creek for future needs and not protect or enhance Eckloff Park for future generations?
Yep. Yeah, great. That's a great question. And so there's a few reasons for that. What's unique about the properties off of Railway Avenue is some of those lands, one of the two parcels was acquired through implementation of the Spring Creek Area Redevelopment Plan. And there are certain agreements in place around the construction of park facilities there. In addition, it's a site that is well suited to a park that could potentially accommodate on-site parking. It's large, so it can accommodate facilities easily. Whereas the open space and recreation plan at the town does not identify that as appropriate for Eckloff Park due to the size of the site, its current location, and its constraints right on an arterial roadway on the one side, but a very narrow lot as well. We can't accommodate things like a large playground facility there. It's also not a need in that pocket, whereas we do have a need on the eastern edge to accommodate more of that density and more of the future residents along Railway Avenue, Bow Valley Trail, and so on. So it doesn't mean those things are off the table in the future. It means the open space and trails plan doesn't identify Eckloff Park as a park space that is needed in the future. So the current designation of municipal reserve would keep, and municipal reserve land, the purpose of it is to address community needs, and there's a few uses that can be for. One of those is parks. So if council in the future wanted to have a park go on that site, this area plan doesn't preclude that from happening. It just reaffirms that its current designation as municipal reserve is appropriate.
Awesome, thank you. So we have a question regarding parking. And the question is, will 10th Street parking still be in the plan? And I'm assuming this is on-street parking.
Yeah, I think on-street parking is probably what the question's about. One of the challenges with doing an area plan, or not a challenge, I should say, just a reality, is these are high level, future looking 25, 30, 40, 50, 60-year plans. Detailed street design would still have to happen when those items are up for renewal in the future, when that street needs to be replaced. But we acknowledge the importance of on-street parking. So when those streets are redesigned in the future, we would look at how can we still accommodate on-street parking along with the other needs like street trees, for example, upgrading the sidewalks to a proper width. But the intent would be, or I shouldn't say the intent, but we acknowledge there's the need for on-street parking in these areas. So we would look to preserve that and fit it into the new design wherever we can.
That's great, thanks. And another question on parking, and maybe you could, if you could speak to the rationale behind this on a higher level, about removing parking minimums and how that's fitting into the larger vision for parking management downtown.
Sure. So we've, based on some of the feedback we received, we've explored other avenues around the removal of parking minimums. We're also looking at changes to the cash and lieu program the town has, which for those that aren't familiar, if a developer wants to provide less parking spaces than required, we do have a policy that applies to the commercial areas downtown that says they can do it, but they have to pay a fee. And we are looking instead at an option where rather than changing the parking minimums, we just make some improvements to the cash and lieu program so that we have better participation in that and can fund parking facilities as needed as a result. With that said, though, some of the rationale behind the reduction in parking minimums, this is something we've seen sort of around the world shift, is parking minimums today are an arbitrary minimum that we set that is not based on necessarily the needs of a development or the community. And downtown in particular, it poses a lot of problems as the water table in a lot of areas is directly below the surface. Underground parking in a lot of areas can't be accommodated. Or if we allow parking, it ultimately means you have to raise the entire building, an entire story above the ground to fit it in. Parking minimums, if those get changed as part of implementation of the plan, it would not mean parking would not happen. And when we speak to the development industry, we know there is huge demand to provide parking as part of any development. It just takes the town out of mandating an arbitrary minimum. and lets them set it based on their anticipated buyers. And if those buyers have vehicles, need to have parking on site. So with that said, though, we're not actually proposing that route. We're now looking at changes to the cash in lieu, but it's worth pointing out it's just one of the possible number of tools where we say, how can we make this area work for people that have cars? But if someone also doesn't have a vehicle, how can they also find a home that doesn't commit them to a parking space they don't need and have that be factored into the cost of that development and therefore the cost of the unit as well?
Yeah, that's helpful. We had a few questions on different aspects of parking minimums, so that's helpful. And then on the, I know you spoke to this briefly in the presentation, but there's a question about how this plan, if implemented as presented, will cost taxpayers.
So when we do area plans, there's obviously tools we have. We get developer contributions. They might, for example, improve the street frontage. So outside of their development, they might upgrade the street and put in a bike lane, widen sidewalks, street trees, bay parking. You might see that, for example, at the development that happened not too long ago at 7th and 7th. So some improvements will get funded that way. Some will also get funded through offsite levies where we can collect levies from new development towards specific improvements, specific infrastructure improvements. And then the other piece is obviously just our budgeting process at the town. So it would be subject to prioritization as happens today around any project. So if there's an opportunity that arises to do an improvement, for example, because a street needs to be redesigned, that would become part of the budgeting cycle and would be part of a discussion around how much of a priority that is against other things and are enough funds collected to be allocated towards that. So there's no immediate impact from area plans on taxes that get collected. It just identifies future needs for an area. So we aren't guessing 10 or 20 years from now what we have to provide. We can actually figure out a way to service the growth more efficiently while still being subject to the constraints we have as a municipality and the budget that we currently have as a town.
Thanks so much, Josh. And holy, we've really put you in the hot seat this afternoon, and we are at the end of our time together today, but just for today, because if you are able to, there's some additional ways that you can follow up with additional questions or chat to Josh in person. So I just want to remind you of some of the open opportunities that we have for you to provide feedback. So currently we have a survey open right now until March 2nd, and this is really a pulse check to get a sense of the general sentiment, like how is this plan landing? People generally like the direction of the overall plan. And you can find that survey at mycanmore.ca/connect downtown. We also have an event called the warm up. So again, we did this last year. I'll put one screen here. This is in collaboration with the Canmore Folk Festival. It's happening this Thursday, starting at 6 p.m. There's some free elements, there's some ticketed elements, and we'll all at the Civic Center, we will have a pop-up engagement for Connect Downtown. So come in and swing by, hang out by the fire, grab a hot chocolate, and you can ask Josh all your hard questions. And we'll also be sharing a recording of this session for anyone who was not able to attend. So feel free to share this as well. And you can also follow up with us via email. We can get you all the answers that maybe we didn't, and questions we didn't get to over the course of this call. You can reach us at communications@canmore.ca. All of that contact information is available on our project site. That's mycanmore.ca/connect downtown. So I want to thank Josh for your time and presentation today, and for all of you for joining us and taking the time out of your day to learn more about this plan and to be involved. We really do appreciate it, and it's a very exciting time to shape the future of our community. So thank you so much, and hope to see you this week at the warm-up.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.